I'm Arlie Hack. I'm a development manager at Northcrest Developments and serve as the co-chair of ULI Toronto's Accelerating Accessibility Coalition. Welcome to our webinar, which we're pleased to be hosting in partnership with Dialogue during National Accessibility Week. So we begin, as always, with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We also acknowledge and honor those who came here involuntarily, particularly those who are descendants of enslavement. So ULI Toronto is committed to hosting an inclusive and accessible webinar experience for all participants, which includes the following features that you can enable on your computer, including live closed captioning, Zoom screen reader, compatibility, keyboard navigation support, and Q&A chat feature to submit typed questions. Please do let us know if you have any questions as to how to enable any of these features so that we can ensure future webinars are accessible. ULI Toronto hosts a key impact initiative, the Accelerating Accessibility Coalition. It was launched in just over 3 years ago, and already it's an award-winning community of over 110 leaders from real estate development, accessibility, civic, and research organizations from 6 provinces who share a vision for a more accessible Canada. Our mission is to significantly increase the supply and availability of housing that meets the needs of people of all ages and abilities. Through education, resource sharing, thought leadership, and networking, the AAC informs and inspires home builders to make accessibility a greater priority as they build new homes for the growing and evolving needs of the Canadian population. It demonstrates where existing building codes fall short and equips home builders and their partners with practical tools to deliver more accessible and inclusive communities. If you're not already a member, you can check out the coalition pages on the ULI Toronto website. A link will be posted in the chat. Today's event and the impact of ULI Toronto's programming throughout the year would not be possible without the leadership and the commitment of our annual sponsors. Their support enables ULI to convene across sectors, elevate best practices, and foster informed dialogue on the most pressing land use challenges facing our region. This is more than sponsorship. It's a partnership rooted in shared purpose. Together, ULI is able to deliver thoughtful programs, credible research, and meaningful opportunities for engagement across our 2,000 member network. On behalf of ULI Toronto's staff and leadership, we want to thank these companies for their continued confidence in our mission. Their partnership underpins everything we do. And with that, ULI Toronto is pleased to be hosting this webinar with Dialogue during National Accessibility Week that will showcase examples of accessibility across various asset classes from across the country. It is my pleasure to invite our moderator, Nick Kennedy, Associate and Senior Interior Designer at Dialogue, to kick things off. You will find Nick's bio in the chat along with all the other speakers as they come on. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you so much, Arle. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It's my pleasure to be moderating this important discussion on accessibility as the next frontier in real estate. Accessibility is rapidly emerging as one of the most transformative and under-leveraged frontiers in real estate. Across public and private sectors, we're seeing new approaches to designing for true inclusion, with approaches that treat accessibility not only as compliance, but as a core design intelligence. Today, we'll be discussing accessibility innovations across Canada, from clinical research practices to built environment examples, to illustrate how more accessible spaces benefits all people and adds real value to developments. On the next slide, my name is Nick Kennedy. To introduce myself, I'm an associate and senior interior designer at Dialogue, based out of our Calgary studio. I'm also a Rick Hansen Foundation Accessibility Certified Professional, and I chair Enable Dialogue, which is an internal practice group at Dialogue focused on improving accessibility within our work, which I will speak to more soon. On the next slide is a bit of an introduction to who Dialogue is. We are design practice comprising architects, urban planners, interior designers, structural, mechanical, and electrical engineers, landscape architects, and sustainability consultants. We are passionate about design and believe it can and should meaningfully improve the well-being of our communities and the environment that we all share. Diversity is foundational to our multidisciplinary team, and equity and inclusion within our community is central to Dialogue's ethos. By prioritizing accessibility, cultural relevance, and community voices, Dialogue creates environments where people feel welcome, safe, and included. On the next slide, so within Dialogue, Enable Dialogue is our internal roundtable comprised of passionate staff members across our practice that is focused on promoting inclusive design best practices across our work, which I'm proud to be the chair of. We provide project accessibility mentorship, facilitate accredited educational courses, and program external speaker series, all with the goal of improving our collective knowledge on how accessibility is integral to thriving communities. Enable Dialogue also fosters partnerships with like-minded organizations striving to create a more accessible Canada, including a recent workshop in Toronto with Stopgap Foundation, where our group built 4 ramps for local businesses with stepped building entrances, which is the photo you see on screen, which is when we were in their workshop space. Dialogue is also proud to be a member of the Accelerating Accessibility Coalition. Starting in 2023, Dialogue partnered with the University Laval in Quebec City to complete a 3-year qualitative research study on airport accessibility. The Inclusive Airport Study reviews current accessibility states within Canadian airports of various scales, with on-site reviews completed by participants of a wide range of abilities. The final report, which is being completed this year, will provide innovative recommendations that will redefine how we design air travel to support all users and how accessibility can shape aviation development. So after that brief introduction to who myself and Dialogue is, we'll start to frame our conversation for the day. So accessibility is the practice of making products, services, systems, and environments usable for as many people as possible, regardless of physical, sensory, or cognitive ability. The 2022 Canadian Survey on Disability identified that 27% of Canadians aged 15 or older have at least one disability, and that number is only increasing as our aging population continues to grow. For many years, accessibility within the built environment was considered simply a code compliance issue, meeting the minimal requirements set out as required. But within most building codes, accessibility requirements have primarily focused on those with physical disabilities, specifically people using wheeled mobility devices. It's important for us to remember that wheelchair users make up only 8% of people with disabilities, so the built environment must also consider the unique needs of the other 92% of people who may have other physical, sensory, or cognitive disabilities. True accessible developments require more than just basic code compliance, but an intrinsic integration of universal design strategies. Clinical research and validation, consultation with those with lived experience, and third-party certifications are just a few of the many ways that accessibility within real estate is shifting. And today we'll discuss those innovations across a variety of sectors. It's my pleasure to introduce our 3 speakers for today's sessions. We have joining us David Demers, Executive Director of Operations and Accessibility at the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, Quebec, Garrick Ng, Kite Create Programs Lead at the University Health Network's Kite Research Institute, and Caitlin Thomas, Accessibility Programs Coordinator at Calgary Airport. Each of them will share a brief presentation on accessibility innovations within their respective work, and you'll find their bios in the chat as they come on. Afterwards, we'll have a panel discussion between all of us, and then we'll open it up to an audience Q&A. So to start, join me in welcoming Garrick Ng from the UHN Kite Research Institute. Garrick, take it away.
Thank you, Nick, for that setup. Really appreciate the invite to be part of this important conversation during this very important week. I had a bit of a visual descriptor as to who I am. I am a middle-aged Asian man, today sporting a white short sleeve on a warm Toronto morning, which is where I'm dialing in from, and showing a little more on this camera, salt and pepper on the beard than I'd like to, but such is aging, and maybe an apt transition to the lens that we'd like to bring to this conversation. So I'm part of Kite's partnerships team. I'm going to do my best to speak to some of the very diverse science that our various researchers, innovators, and scientists represent. So while this is about one of the communities, I'm referencing that I would invite a conversation around our aging and senior population, right? Because as much as I know through my esteemed panelists, going to be speaking to many different communities, sometimes just zooming in on the specific needs of a concrete particular community just gives us a richer base to start to talk and think about how we might design for the needs of that community. So if we could advance a slide, move quickly through a bit of context as to the perch that we represent. So Kite is a major research hospital based in Toronto. Among our various active kind of patient care settings, we have a number of research institutes. So KITE in particular works in the area of healthcare innovation as it relates to injury prevention, rehabilitation, aging, and accessibility. We can hop to the next slide. We have some very unique spaces. We skipped this past years of Doors Open Toronto, but over the last 2 years, we actually opened our doors to the public, and a lot of people are just blown away by the fact that we have these amazing underground test and simulation facilities under University Avenue, right beside one of our core subway lines. And what we our labs enable the research community, industry partners to do is simulate challenging real world environments. And I'll get to that as we look to some of our work. If we could advance to the next slide. So how do we create impact, right? As a research institute that's dedicated to translational science, we do this in a number of ways. Specific to this community, a lot of work that our scientists are involved in is to really shape and inform standards and guidelines. You'll see some of the examples in upcoming slides. The idea of supporting innovation, so whether it's incubated through our labs or brought to us by third parties, we have a unique ability to help our partners test and validate ideas, right, as they go to market, with the access to so many different patient populations across our hospital network, opportunities for clinical research as well, are abound throughout our network. If we advance to the next slide. Just an example of some of the scientists. We have a dearth of talent that, and I'm picking on a few good folks that are typically top of mind when we come to built environment. And I'll invite this audience to kind of scan their backgrounds. But all this is to say, when it comes to rehabilitation science, there's a lot of dimensions. And Nick kind of touched on the various dimensions off the top, where this idea of being able to look at issues, develop complex care plans is the language that we use, really is drawing upon a number of different expertise that I'll go ahead and highlight in the next slide. So I won't spend too much time in the next couple of slides because Nick, I think, set up a great kind of opener on what we mean by accessibility, the fact that we are, for this audience and beyond, I hope, well past just compliance, right? And often compliance in the built environment speaks to physical aspects. So I'll invoke here some of the language in our relatively recent and updated Accessible Canada's Act, where it's really about ensuring equal participation for all. And what that means, if we jump to the next slide, is I think stepping back and elevating our conversation beyond just accessibility as often relates to how we interact physically, but to this idea of inclusive design, which really thinks about and considers the diverse range of human experience and the many touch points that we have, not just within our households, but across our communities, through our mobility and transport networks. All of that, we think requires a more expansive view of how we think about inclusive design. So if we were to go into how KITE kind of sheds light and invites collaboration on these areas, let's jump to our next slide. It does run the full gamut, and I'll sorry, I forgot about this one. I mentioned off the top that I wanted to kind of invite us to zoom in on one particular community. In this case, the idea of our aging population, which, as you scan these stats, it's not new news that we are in a demographic bubble where the senior population is accounting for a tremendous growth. And as I assume, a lot of developers, community planners around the table are probably tracking these trends in terms of what that means for building stock, right? Both what we need to do with our existing builder stock and how we can think progressively and future-proof kind of what's to come, right? So this is an issue that has a lot of, obviously, health implications, social equity implications, and market implications, to put bluntly, for this audience. So if we were to jump ahead, what the remaining slides, and I do want to move through these briskly so we have more time for panel conversation, is just to highlight how on these various aspects that Nick reference, right? The physical, the social, the cognitive sides of accessibility. We at UHN Kite are contributing to the conversation. So one, as you saw through our labs, we have the ability to test, to shape standards. Our specialty is human factor testing, which, as you can probably intuit, is difficult and needs to be done in all the right sort of ways. So we have scientists that are forming everything from Accessible Standard Canada kind of guidelines to CSA to ASTM and various kind of building technical committees. If we can move to the next. It was mentioned the cognitive side, right? And this speaks to a lot of what we talk about, the invisible kind of disabilities that impact many different parts of our population, and this certainly is top of mind when we come to an aging population, right? What you see is an example of one of the sites that's coming online, our new Myrna Daniels Senior Emergency Medicine Center, which through amazing collaborations with our design architecture team has created new opportunities to think about design of spaces through a lens of physical design, multisensory design, really tuned to the needs of aging populations. We here, my Kite is based within the Toronto Rehab Facility. At UHN, we have our version of this in the form of a specialized dementia unit, right, which is really attuned to the needs of that population group. And a lot of this is considering, the needs as people experience different, in this case, cognitive decline, and that's a hugely important factor in how we think about our physical spaces. Next slide, please. The social dimension is starting to get, I think, a lot more airtime as it deserves, right? A lot of science going into calling out the not just the physical benefits, but the mental health, wellness, and even the broader social and intergenerational kind of connectivity benefits that accrue not just to the aging population, but families, caretakers, and the broader community. So highlighting that, we have what's called the NORC Innovation Center here at UHN. They're a wonderful sort of think tank outreach group that's looking at this notion of naturally occurring retirement communities. So developments that might not have as an origin story intended to support aging communities, but have evolved such. So thinking about the types of communal spaces, the types of resident engagement is a huge part of thinking about supporting our aging population. A couple more slides. I'll speak quickly to, I mentioned that a lot of the work our labs do is to validate technologies. And I do think we're entering into a very exciting time where it's all of the add-on solutions that can support, and these are a few medical buzzwords, but this notion of aging in place or remote care, where more and more from wearables to AI, agentic agents, there's just a lot of very interesting, efficient solutions that can be deployed to augment how we think about our physical spaces. And then lastly, the other dimension I'll call out, and I'm citing one of our more recent experiments through our social medicine kind of arm, this idea of supportive housing. So that it factors real estate into it. So really this notion of housing as more than a human right, but as a part of an integrated care plan. So I invite you all to look into Dunn House. We're looking at a second phase now that's targeting an older community of vulnerable patients. And this is this integration of housing with the kind of wraparound supports that is an interesting way of elevating the conversation, right, beyond just physical. Because I think some of my friends will speak to the bigger picture of why we're here, right? We're a proud member of the Accelerating Accessibility Coalition because we want to speak and work more directly with industry, right? As much as we do a lot of that front-end research, there's lots of opportunities to partner with us to really shape the future of what inclusive design looks like. So I'll pause here and jump back in as we get to our panel. And thank you for the time and opportunity to share our work here.
Thank you so much, Garrick. This is Nick speaking again, for sharing the many ways that the Kite Research Institute's clinical research in accessibility and aging populations is shaping the way that standards, developers, and designers can integrate accessibility best practices. Our next speaker, please join me in welcoming Caitlin Thomas from Calgary Airports.
Well, thank you so much, Nick. As Nick mentioned, I'm Caitlin Thomas. I'm an accessibility programs coordinator at Calgary Airports. My role really is to elevate accessibility through the passenger experience and to work with our accessibility advisory committee to address barriers to access. And I'm pleased to be here just to share some examples of advancements we've been making throughout various projects. So thank you very much for the opportunity. On the right-hand side of this intro slide, we see three people navigating through the terminal on a moving walkway, one of which is wearing the Hidden Disabilities Sunflower lanyard. So with that, I'll dive straight into it. If we could jump to the next slide, please. So on this slide, we see the exterior of the International Terminal building at Calgary Airports, along with our departures level roadway in the evening. In 2025, Calgary Airport saw 19.4 million passengers travel through our airport, an increase of 500,000 over 2024. And as passenger volumes grow and disability becomes an increasingly common part of the traveler experience, accessibility is both a matter of dignity and an often overlooked opportunity to create better outcomes both for our guests, businesses, and the broader travel ecosystem. When it comes to design, it's about more than just physical spaces. It's about an experience across a journey, especially in an airport environment. And when we can understand where someone is within their journey, both within a physical space and throughout their unique lived experience, we can inform better design choices, better understand barriers to access and how to prevent them, and we can move beyond compliance exercises into lived experience perspectives that elevate design choices to achieve a dignified experience. Next slide, please. On this slide, we see a photograph of our accessibility entry of our new centralized screening facility. And this is really a great example of where we're creating barrier-free experiences within our new centralized screening facility. It reflects important and inclusive design choices and partnering with dialogue. And really the challenge in many airports is that security screening is often the highest stress point in the entire passenger journey. So our solution is really to create a screening point in which the design itself helped to reduce the cognitive load that people typically experience through designing predictable spaces, enabling flexibility for our guests, while reducing the sensory stimuli that's often present in this kind of area. So in planning for this solution, we were mindful of two different lenses, a disability first lens and a barrier first lens. And a disability first lens really asks, what does someone with a certain type of disability need at security screening? And while this can be helpful, the risk is that if we use that in isolation, it can fragment the experience and potentially introduce unintended barriers for others. On the other hand, when we look at things through a barrier first lens, we're asking a different question. What gets in the way of any person moving through this environment with confidence and dignity? And now the value of this approach is really that it moves beyond that traditional compliance exercise, merely meeting technical specs on paper, and rather it helps us to understand the unique perspectives of individuals who actually use these sorts of spaces and the barriers that they typically experience. So it really helps us to understand how existing and future guest experience programs can be supported through the infrastructure design, both to ensure that the design and the experience work together, not just in parallel. Next slide, please. So on this slide, there's three photographs, again, one of the accessibility entrance to the screening point, as well as two of the interior of the screening point. So we can see some of the security screening lanes, the revassed tables, as well as the beautiful architectural design of the ceiling to resemble waves and the river. So when we were working on this project, we brought in lived experience advisors, frontline staff, and examined feedback and pinch points in the existing journey. And we were able to achieve an environment that empowers confidence as people move through it. Design choices were made to really reduce that cognitive load by enabling calm, predictable experience. And we were able to introduce a dedicated accessibility screening queue that was incorporated for guests who might want additional support going through the journey. To offer greater awareness of non-apparent disabilities as well, we've integrated dedicated signage for the Hidden Disabilities Sunflower program to the queue entrance. But it was important as well to be mindful that all standard screening lanes were incorporated with accessibility requirements, not just the dedicated accessibility queue. So for example, the e-gates at the queue entrance, they include tactile and braille signage. Lighting and material finishes were also selected to reduce glare and visual noise while also being mindful of acoustics to enable a quieter environment. And for this particular project, lived experience was incorporated in a few different ways. Firstly, as Nick mentioned, in partnering with the University of Laval's Inclusive Airport Study and in collaboration with Dialogue and other partners, we were able to capture feedback through comprehensive on-site tours that simulated domestic departure and international arrival passenger flows with lived experience volunteers. As well, we worked with our Accessibility Advisory Committee at YYC, and our lived experience advisors were able to share perspectives that shaped important design outcomes. So with that, the outcome of the screening point has been a huge success, supporting both our current travel needs while also future-proofing to enable enhanced accessibility services for seamless transitions throughout airport security and beyond. And I'd just like to take a quick moment to highlight the Hidden Disabilities Sunflower for those who might not be familiar with it. This initiative was launched in 2016 in the UK and has since become globally recognized. And if an individual chooses to wear a sunflower lanyard, they're able to discreetly identify that they might have a non-apparent disability and need a little bit more time and support throughout the airport journey. Launching the Sunflower at YIC in 2023 and integrating concepts into centralized screening continues to make positive impacts for our guests. Next slide, please. And this slide, we see a photograph of a family going through our international check-in hall. And really designing for dignity for us means an accessible design that creates an ecosystem that flexes to the different needs, preferences, and comfort levels of travelers. It takes into consideration not only the operational needs, but the guest-centric programs and services that create that seamless experience in the built environment. So if there's three things I'd encourage you to take away from today's discussion, it'd be to engage early and continuously throughout the project. It's crucial to integrate accessibility upfront into the planning before anybody arrives into the space. And this not only reduces the risk of costly retrofits later on, but enhances the experience of those using the space. Second is to seek a diverse range of lived experience perspectives. Designing for one or only a few types of disabilities often introduces challenges for others. The broader the perspectives included from the start, the more universal the design will be. And lastly, focus on barrier identification and mitigation. It's not useful or strategic to merely focus on the disability first lens. Brainstorming from the barrier first lens leads to more robust conversations and solutions. And it's through these strategies that we were able to launch a successful screening facility. So we're very excited to see how it continues to make positive impacts for travelers for years to come. Next slide, please. With that, thanks very much, and I'll pass it back over to you, Nick.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. It's really exciting to see how airport authorities are integrating accessibility to create more inclusive and welcoming experiences for all. Next, we'll hear from our last speaker, David Demers from the CNIB Quebec. Pass it to you, David.
Hello, everyone, and thank you. I'm David Demers, and I'm the Executive Director of Operations for CNIB Quebec and of Accessibility for CNIB, also overseeing the Access Labs division that is one of our social enterprise accessibility consulting branches of the CNIB. And I'm really happy to be here today to talk to you about our new office that we're moving into on 121 King Street at Rosarick Place, and to talk to you a little bit about how we designed it for everyone with inclusive design at its core, and really to talk to you about how we want to use the space to show the community how inclusive design can be done in practice and what it looks like. And so on the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit about how our approach is really one of inclusive design with the philosophy of nothing about us without us, or nothing for us without us. And that's really the core of the principle. And what we really wanted to do was not to design for the people that will use the space, but with the people. And so every decision was tested against lived experience, and the people who will use the space are helping to shape it. And that's the thing that is really core here, but also testing different situations or designs for different types of people. So for example, I'll talk a little bit about the color palette that we chose for interior design, and how that was tested by different types of people with different low vision, eye conditions, color blindness, and so on, so that it can work for the most amount of people. We, of course, grounded our design in accessibility, Canada's accessibility standards, in best practices and guidelines that exist around universal accessibility. Um, and it's really inclusion led by design because it's the accessibility that shapes the space and from the start and that way the accessibility becomes part of the design and not added on. And there's a few things that enables as well that I'll talk about. Next slide, please. Um, and so whose voices were there to help shape the space? And it is really a matter of including lived experience, including those who will use the space, potential partners that will come and use the space. So we really wanted to include the most amount of opinions and views possible. And so the main part was our accessibility advisory team that was composed of people with lived experience that would review the design at each stage and make recommendations to help shape the space throughout the whole floor. We worked with our deafblind community services as well to make sure that everything was working well, that would work well for them in the design. And through that consultation, we discovered that by putting a high contrast green wall in our skills development space is really going to help a lot for ASL training and ASL in general. We had kept in mind guide dog users, of course, where there's going to be some amenities put in place for guide dogs, and always making sure as well that anybody with mobility devices or anything of that nature is able to use the space so that we have shorter benches, countertop heights that are adequate, and enough space and so on. So on the next slide. I will tell you a little bit about the space and the color contrast and the lighting that actually does play a big role in making the space inclusive and accessible. It's not always about the architecture and the size of the doors, but it comes down also to the interior design and the way that that is done. So the color selection is an important one. And of course, we wanted a color choice that was meaningful for the CNIB. And speaking of meaningful, this is a big change for us because we've always been at our Bayview location, which has hundreds of years of history behind it. It had an immense impact. But like I said at the beginning, now we want to be at the center of Canada's biggest city to be able to show how inclusive design is done with our partners in the space, showing it and doing it and really playing a role. And so, of course, we're the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, and having meaningful colors that represent Canada were a great addition to it. And we were able to discover that the Canadiana colors that include some amber, maroon, slate blue, pine green, and taupe really had the right level of contrast that we needed. And we tested that contrast with people with different types of eye conditions, different types of color blindness conditions, and so on. We also make sure that adjoining surfaces, the contours around doors and floors and elevators and so on, all contrast with each other. And so that's even when we think about the tables, the chairs, with respect to the floors and so on, that they all contrast with each other so that every element for anyone with low vision is able to navigate the space more easily and more safely. The carpet is going to have as little pattern on it as possible to be not cause any issues with the pattern, but also it might include areas that contrast in the right way to help lead people in the right direction. And lighting will be used in the same way. For example, where it's good even lighting all around, that is what is often required by people in our community, but also some accented lighting like above the reception to kind of help guide people to the reception area by means of the lighting. And the sound as well is taken into consideration where we have perforated sound dampeners, and the layout of the space is also thought of to help create break spaces where it helps break the noise from one space to the other. Next slide, please. The wayfinding is also a critical part of our design. We have the in-floor tactile strips that will help guide people from the reception to the elevators. The elevators will have the appropriate braille signage and panels The elevator call panel as well will be fully accessible. And so, because we are seeing a lot of new elevator panels that are not accessible, and we're also keeping into account for mobility device users the height of those panels so that they're also usable for them as well. The elevators will have the right amount of contrast so we can see the elevator opening if we have low vision. And so then also the rooms and the layout of the rooms are all thought of to be the same, very similar, so that the layout is more easy to be understood by someone who is blind. So the layout also plays a role in it, and the signage to show that each room to identify each room and to also show if a room is occupied. So through our lived experience consultation, we found that that would be very useful for someone who is blind to know if a meeting room is already occupied or not without walking into it and disturbing everyone. So those are little touches that we're including. And we can move on to the next slide, please. Um, and there's room to move and mobility for everyone. And so there's clear access for the tables and the heights of tables and the legs that are such that mobility devices will be able to use the space. There's a lot of space to move around. The sound that I already mentioned is being managed as much as possible so that there are enough quiet spaces or that the sound in more loud spaces doesn't leak over into the quiet spaces, flexible furniture, modulable spaces so that we can move things around and and fix if there's more room needed for whatever reason. The guide dog access areas as well. There's going to be a guide dog area that is better quality materials that they can move around and play in. And there's also an outdoor covered grass area that will be there so that we can be covered from the rain when we need to bring our dog outside. So next slide, please. And that's one of the points that I was saying here in this slide about the guide dog space is actually on this slide. So it's really designing the space for the community that will use it. And so it's taking into consideration that there's staff that's going to be there. There's going to be program staff that are hosting people from the community to do workshops and events. There's our partners and stakeholders that also represent different types of disability groups that will want and to come meet with us and use our space. There's all of the surrounding area as well that is going to be very accessible in terms of public transportation, the path, and all of these places that will be able to now say, we use this space and we need it to be more accessible. So it's also going to help serve as a beacon for outreach. The skills development room I mentioned that is being very well thought of for ASL. And the what I mean about integrating the accessibility in the design, it's also about making the space beautiful and integrating tactile art is something that we're going to plan to do on the reception wall. And there's even an idea that came up to make a texture on the reception wall that will echo a guide dog handle essentially. So there's um, some thought given to what type of tactile art will be there as well. And the result will really be a workplace where inclusion is designed in from the start and not added on, as we always talk about. And next slide, please. And so that's what is really at the core of what we're doing, and really what I like to talk about in the design of our space is how we really included the lived experience at every stage of the design process and even afterwards. So thank you for your time, and we look forward to some good questions, and thank you again.
Thank you so much, David, for sharing a great example of accessibility excellence within workplace real estate and the results of consultation with people with lived experience. So now that we've heard from each of our speakers individually, we will have about 10 minutes of a panel discussion, and then we'll have the last 10 minutes of our time together doing an audience Q&A. So I encourage everyone listening in to start formulating your questions. I already see some forming in the Q&A portion. So before we get to the audience questions, I have a few questions to start us all off. So Caitlin and David, you both shared some great examples of integrating accessibility practices within real estate developments, within workplace and aviation. Garrick, you spoke to how aging in place presents an untapped market in kind of housing developments. I'm curious if all three of you could speak to the value add that you have seen in your own developments or can see in the future for what accessibility brings to real estate. Maybe I'll start with Caitlin. Why don't we start there?
Yeah, thank you. I think that, and from a value add perspective, when we think about accessibility and risk, accessibility has started to change how we think about risk. Again, it's not just that mere code compliance. We're thinking about how people will actually use the space that's been designed as intended. And so when we think about, the work that we had done for a centralized screening, really some of the themes that we heard over and over again was flexibility and choice and how the space is designed and how people choose to use it, that aspect of choice. So we thought about a screening point and how people might choose to use that. So, enabling that dedicated accessibility queue provides that flexibility and choice for somebody, who might want a little bit more support going throughout their journey. While, flexibility in the design and other aspects, the standard screening lanes and whatnot, can provide more independence for those who want to navigate independently throughout their journey as well.
Great.
David here. I think what I really like about the fact that we designed these inclusive spaces that we were able to show to everyone is that they'll often come into our space and kind of be like, this just looks like any other regular office. Or, apart from the few added features that we really tailored for the community that we want to serve, and those are just intelligent things that make the space more usable. In general, people are finding that it's not that complicated and that it's not really much of a different space, which is what I like to show, that these are actually much more usable spaces and they're not that much more difficult to do than any other type of space.
And then for us, apart from the very clinical spaces that might be less relevant for this audience, and I think a concept that could be interesting to think about, that kind of bridges the whole health care and design and development in more residential public spaces, is thinking about this idea of continuum of care, right? Like aging is not a binary. We're older, we're not. Or we experience the full breadth of accessibility challenges, or we're not. There's generally a relatively kind of predictable journey from need for assisted living, maybe a care partner, right, in the picture, to kind of fully assisted. So that lens, if you kind of flip it to what that means for design of buildings, we're already starting to see some of this happen, right? Do we need, and I won't comment on the market economics or feasibility, right? But like from top to bottom, fully accessible, 120% compliance off the top, or do you kind of design for visibility, right? Just ensuring that at least, right, members from different disability communities have the freedom, autonomy to experience, right, spaces, whether they're primary residents or not. That from there to what is of particular interest to us, some of the bigger picture, maybe more at a master planner or master developer level, where you now can get into some of the more juicy opportunities for integrated design. You're thinking about how public spaces, outdoor spaces weave with communal spaces, weave with different developments. Thinking about again through that lens of the aging arc, continuum of care. How we plan, right, and stage, right, our buildings for both for immediate use or kind of future, if we have the ability to look that far down the road. And I recognize some of this is leaning into maybe some policy questions, right, around how that gets shaped through developer incentives or zoning requirements. But that's interesting to us. So we're kind of early conversations at that kind of master planner, master developer level to say, hey, what perspectives from true kind of understanding of the lived experience of an aging population or different disability communities could we bring to help your design teams and planners inject that into your plans. And that's where we'll leave the ingenuity to the people on this call, but we're happy to kind of provide the healthcare context and insights to shape that.
Yeah, thank you all. As we look to striving towards more inclusive communities, it's imperative that we all reframe accessibility from a mere code compliance issue to a fundamental design principle and development access. I'm wondering if each of you could share either a process or a strategy that developers could use to integrate accessibility best practices into their projects beyond just simple code minimum requirements. Maybe, Garrick, why don't we start with you and we'll work our way backwards.
I don't want to hassle because we don't develop kind of those end user sites specifically, and we're agnostic, right? Like we have friends. I won't name them all. There's a lot of like standards that exist in audit kind of site audit frameworks that we always encourage, right? Designers, developers to look into. I think that's the first step. Like draw on the vast knowledge. David, you have a group, right, that specifically could consult at a more one-on-one level. We're out there, right? And I think it's been emphasized by different speakers that involving the kind of lived experience groups that you're trying to serve as early as possible. I think I'll leave it there, right? And if it does come to us, it's usually at the research level. We have UHN, and we're not the only facility that has basically different versions of patient ambassador groups where we have access, right? And the ability to kind of bring those perspectives early on, in our case, some of the foundational research. But some of those opportunities might exist, right? To kind of add that voice to your design process too. So I think that from my person, that's kind of where I can speak to. Others may have very specific kind of trajectories you've taken.
Yeah. How about yourself, David?
I strongly recommend that people with lived experience are consulted at different stages of the design process, and I think that's where it's really when you include real users that you find true usability gaps, and that's only the way that you can address them. And so, because you might have standards that comply, but it's not entirely usable for everyone. It's also important to provide flexibility and different options. And so the consulting of lived experience is not only to help you shape the design, but it also shows the community that you're transparent and you know that you won't get letters from communities afterwards saying, how could you not consult us in this terrible design, or things like that. So, and there are many examples of that. But also there's a lot of principles around participatory design that don't just include consulting with lived experience, but include transparency, communications, considering the local culture in which the building is being built. So there's a lot of principles like that that can be applied. And then you really get, in my opinion, the highest quality design. And I like to encourage architects and designers to not always think about the cost of the accessibility on the expense column of the spreadsheet, but also think about the optimization of the space and the more people who can use it, which optimizes the revenue line of the space. So there's two ways of looking at it that can make it important. And for designers, if you integrate accessibility in the design, it could actually be beautiful. And so I think that's something that we all like and strive for.
Thank you. Caitlin, yourself?
Along similar lines, it's so crucial to involve lived experience perspectives throughout all stages of that project journey, all the way through to operational handoff. And so I think, in terms of some places to get started, you don't know what you don't know. So starting with, an accessibility expert and kind of paving the path there with where your teams are at with training and awareness. And then, there I think is some value in, the code requirements, of course, but there's best practice standards across all different regions as well. And so, it's more well known in terms of those ramps and curb cut aspects to design. But when we start thinking about best practice beyond mobility, as Nick mentioned from the beginning, looking to other best practices, for example, British Standards Institute has a publicly available specification on neurodiversity in the built environment. And so designing for those sensory considerations. So I think it's important to consider the code, other best practices that are out there, as well as, all across those stages of the journey, understanding how people actually want to interact with the space and if those are actually hitting where we're trying to go.
If I might add something, I think there was an important point that was just brought up. It's about the interaction with the space that I think is where you want to consult with the lived experience. You don't want to get into a lived experience consultation to reconsider the standards or things like that, because that's already been done through expert consultation and public consultation. So it really is a focus on the interaction and the usability of the space to improve the design.
Yeah, thank you. As much as I have many more questions I'd love to ask you, there's a lot of great questions from our audience, so we'll move into those. We'll start off, someone is wondering, where do all of us recommend looking for best practices and accessibilities for any projects? I can share, talking to all three of our speakers have shared some wonderful examples today, and I encourage you to reach out to all of them to learn more if you're interested. Another great database that I'm aware of is the Rick Hansen Foundation's database, which is a third-party certification that rates buildings on meaningful access within the built environment in the space as it is. They carry a database of all projects that have been certified. So you're welcome to check out their website as well to show you some great projects. But I'll open it up to the three of you if you have any other examples of where people can find best practices.
I'll do a humble plug for CNIB, where we have published what's called Clearing Our Path, and it kind of brings together a whole bunch of different best practices, universal guidelines, and really presents the topmost standards in terms of accessibility for blind people and people with deaf blindness and low vision. And that's a resource that we get a lot of designers and architects that visit. There certainly are other resources, but I'll quickly mention that Clearing Our Path is a good one.
I'll drop. Actually, I'm not. This might only show up in the facilitators, but I put in the facilitators chat, I think, the link to our Nork Innovation Center. So I referenced this in passing, but we have published a number of different kind of targeted reports, everything from best practice broadly about naturally occurring retirement communities to specific contexts like vertical, multi-residential type context. So that's an interesting one that's available for all. And then also humbly and shamelessly plug the ULI AAC. So communities of practice, of which some of us, I think, are probably present here as members. I think I might have seen a link in a prior comment. These are all opportunities to have direct access to folks that are where you are, or maybe a step or two ahead. And that's a great place, right? To be able to share real experiences, talk through what we're doing at the frontier of this, and also to I think elevate the conversation so it becomes a broader kind of industry movement, and dare I say just standard practice, right? As we all kind of elevate our individual practice around these themes. So and this is probably not the only community of practice that exists, but yeah, getting kind of close to peers that have more direct line to experts, and just the true lived experience of trying to do this in market I think developments is seems to be a very valuable resource.
Absolutely. Another question from our audience. So many accessibility codes revolve around wheelchair use. How can codes and designers and developers incorporate different abilities when designing? Maybe I'll start with Caitlin, maybe with your work in the airports.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just a matter of really having that foresight and anticipation of involving those needs and preferences throughout all the different phases. And so looking at it from gathering those lived experience perspectives from a lot of different avenues. So we have our Calgary Airports Accessibility Advisory Committee, and that's a great grouped, in terms of workshops and understanding perspectives and on-site work. And again, we've talked about the U Laval Inclusive Airport Research Studies, so participating in things like that and innovations that are coming forward. And then for us as well, really the guest feedback that we receive on a daily basis, it's really taking a deep dive into that to understand how things are happening in real time as well.
David or Garrick?
I can chime in quick, and this would be where managing expectations, or maybe a little lag for our contributions to get kind of into your design teams, but citing that we have scientists. I'll name Alison Novak, who specializes in sort of bathroom environments. So know that are ongoing research opportunities to collaborate with us where it's not just about like the technical clearance of a doorway, right, or turning radius. It's how a user interacts in, whether wheelchair or other mobility device, or enter, as I hinted earlier, that kind of care partner. There's a lot, we think, of opportunity to actually delve deeper, right? It's not just about a floor plan or a layout. It's actually placement of, right, sinks, showers, bathrooms, and are we, from not just a biomechanical perspective, but from a user comfort, safety perspective, actually creating spaces that are truly useful, not just, because we're taking out our rulers and protractors and looking at access. So it's more, I'm not giving as much weight as it probably deserves, but there's a lot of more nuance in terms of like the actual user experience that, and I'm picking on bathrooms, right? Because that's a critical kind of part of our infrastructure. But it's those type of opportunities that we're drawn to, right? Like to really get that true user lived experience, and share then obviously, right, once we're through kind of our research with this community, so you can incorporate those into your design, would be one of the ways that we're in this conversation.
David here. I think I would add that I think it's important to recognize that it still is somewhat of an evolving landscape. I think now that there is some realization that the building code really is minimum accessible and that there's more that then can be done. So now we have some great work being done by Accessibility Standards Canada. But there's also some standards that still need to be designed. For example, perhaps with navigation and wayfinding technology and messaging, there's still areas there that are lacking, and others. So it's being open to the fact that it can change, to strive for higher than the minimum accessible, and to be open that that it could change over time as standards improve, and that it's okay to make a mistake once in a while. The important thing is that you're learning and that you're improving. So, we work with organizations that sometimes are very hard on themselves and want to get it right the first time, or they want to do everything all at once, and they quickly realize that sometimes that might be too much, and that incremental change is okay, and you gotta, just keep getting better at it as well.
Thank you. All right. I know there's many other questions in the chat. I apologize. We're not going to be able to get to everything with our time, but I do want to thank our audience for their insightful questions. We will find a way to answer them if we can afterward this presentation. It's been my pleasure moderating the conversation, and our host, Arle, will close us out.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. On behalf of ULI and the Accelerating Accessibility Coalition, I want to thank all of our speakers and thank everybody for tuning in today. If you aren't a member yet of the Accelerating Accessibility Coalition, please do visit the coalition's pages on the ULI Toronto website and join today. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.